Michelle Fox with The Simple Quilter. I'm happy to be here today filming my second YouTube video. I wanted to thank everybody who viewed my last video, and for those of you who left comments so far, it's turning out to be a fun and exciting process. During my last video, I talked about two quilts I had made my husband Wes. One I had shown then, and the one behind me is the second one that I've made him. This is from a fabric line called the Thin Red Line, which is a fireman themed fabric. My husband is a part-time fireman, and my son is a full-time fireman. I've actually made two quilts like this. The second one is just a top, but this one's completely done. And this is, of course, my husband's second favorite quilt, and of course it's only the second quilt that I've made him. So I'm going to step aside so you can see that a little bit better, and I'll tell you just a little bit more about it. So here is his name, quilted in here. It says Wex Fox 2030, that's his number. I'm not sure you can see all that. And then down here, down a little bit lower, there's another black area, and it says Big Daddy Fox 2018. That's his nickname at the fire department. He teaches a fire science course at our local high school, and he loves being a volunteer fireman, so I thought this was a good quilt to make him in. Of course, he loves it, so that's what I am aiming for when I make quilts. Alright, today's video is going to be about common quilting tools that I use when I'm sewing. I wanted to do this because I want you to be able to know which tools I'm using throughout my upcoming videos, so that you'll be familiar with those. And I wanted to do this so you'll just be a little bit more familiar with me and the quilting tools which I use. Now, I do want to start with my sewing machine. This is a Bernina 550, and this is a really nice high quality sewing machine. I forgot to plug it in. Just a minute. Oh my goodness, always so many things to remember. Okay, and I haven't always sewed on this high of quality of a machine. When I first started learning to quilt, I sewed on an old sewing machine. It was a Singer. It was a good little machine, and my parents had given me that when I was in junior high school for sewing and home ec. So it was a really old machine. And then later I bought a Brother at Walmart, and then later I bought another Brother, a little higher tech machine at Walmart, and I sewed on those for years, and I made lots and lots of quilts and quilted items with those. But my quilt friends had always encouraged me to invest in a higher quality machine, but I just didn't feel like I could spend the money on it at that time, and I really didn't think it'd make a difference. I thought a sewing machine was a sewing machine. Well, as I was checking this out in the shop and began sewing with it, I realized that I was really wrong. In my first video, I talked about how I always try to sew with the best quilting materials that I can afford. And at that time, I could afford this. And I know lots of quilters can't, but when you get to a point where you can afford a better machine, I really do want to encourage you to get a better sewing machine, because it truly makes a difference when you're sewing. I just couldn't believe the difference, and I love my Bernina sewing machine. Now, I'm not saying you have to buy a Bernina, because there's Janome and Brothers that are higher quality machines, and I'm sure there's a lot more than just those three that I've mentioned, but at least you can try them out at the shops in your area and see what a difference they make. And when you can afford them, I would again encourage you to invest in them. Now, the nice thing about these sewing machines, if you take good care of them, they will last a lifetime, but it is important to provide maintenance and do the things you need to do to keep it in good working order. Now, I wanted to show you the importance of lighting. As I've gotten older, I require more and better lighting. So this is just my machine with just the built-in lights, and then I purchased some adhesive track lighting that I put up under here, and I just purchased that at one of our local quilt shops, and I want to show you the difference that it makes. Okay, I'm going to turn it on so you can see the difference. Can you see how much better that area is lit up now? I love the track lighting that's under there. And it makes a huge difference when I take my sewing machine to quilt retreats or to a location, another location for a sew day where the lighting may not be so great. So that is one of my very important quilting tools. Okay, and then speaking of lighting, I also want to mention my OT light. I use my sewing machine light, the track lighting, my overhead lighting, and then my OT light. I love my OT light. It's an LED light, and it provides even more illumination to the area where I'm sewing. So I really like this. This is portable, and I take that on quilt retreats and to sew days also. Now, I use Schmetz needles in my sewing machine. I don't use the Bernina needles. I use the Schmetz needles. The shop where I bought my quilt said this was a good option for purchasing needles. These are blue jean needles, but I also use universal quilting needles when I'm machine piecing. Of course, I use these when I'm quilting with denim. But I change my needles frequently. Of course, I change them when they break or when I feel like I've hit a needle or I've hit the throat plate or something and it could have bent it. And then I try to change my needles after every single project. If you're having difficulty with your machine, always try to start with changing the needle first. It does make a big difference. And I didn't know for a long time that you needed to change your needle as frequently as that, but you really do. It just makes your sewing better. Now, I do use Aurifil thread. I have a tendency to sew with white background or neutral, so I use those two colors commonly. And then I have lots of different colors for machine quilting my projects. I don't really machine quilt my great big projects, but table runners, wall hangings, I do like to machine quilt those myself. And I have a variety of colored threads there. I use the 50 weight unless I'm sewing with denim, and then I use a 40 weight thread. Okay, so I'm going to remove all this and talk about my cutting tools next. Okay, now the next thing I wanted to cover are my cutting tools. The first thing I wanted to mention are my rotary cutting mats. This is a Fisker self-healing rotary mat, and I also sew with an Omni grid, and it's the bright green with the yellow stripes, the yellow markings in it. Now the Fiskars is not my favorite, but it's what fits my cutting table, my adjustable cutting table. But I do prefer the Omni grid mat. But again, this is the one that fits my cutting surface. I really like using, of course, the self-healing mats, and I think they're easier on your rotary cutter and don't dull it as quickly as some of the other rotary mats. Now, I also use the Creative Grid rotary cutting rulers. The one that I use most commonly is the 8.5 by 24. Now, I like these rulers for 3 reasons. Number one, they're clear and it's very easy for me to see the fabric underneath these when I cut with these. Second, I like the feature that they have 1-inch increments and 1/2-inch increments with cutting. I really do like that. And then they have a non-slip feature. They have these circles with these raised areas on the back that provide a non-slip surface, so when you're cutting, these rulers have less tendency to slip and move around when you're cutting. I also, in addition to the 8.5 by 24.5, I have several different squares. I use a 16.5 inch, a 12.5 inch, 6.5 inch, 4.5 inch. And I have lots more Creative Grid rulers. But if you're a beginner quilter, I really feel like you only need one of the square rulers to square up your blocks. And the 8.5 by 24.5 inch ruler is just a good investment when you're starting out quilting. Now, the rotary cutters that I use are the Olfa rotary cutters. I've used lots of different rotary cutters, but I really do prefer the Olfa rotary cutters. I like the way they feel when I cut, and I don't feel like they put strain on my wrist like some of the others that I've used. And I do want to encourage you to always use a good sharp blade. Now, sometimes quilters want to stretch out these blades, but it really puts less pressure on your wrist if you are using a good sharp blade, and it also makes a nicer cut when your blades are sharp. Okay, now I use the Fiskars little scissors. I have these hanging on my machine. You might have noticed them earlier on hanging on my machine, or at least the little hook on my machine where they do hang. I love these. They have a great sharp little point. I like the way they feel in my hand, and they're sharp, and they've stayed really sharp. I also use the Ginger scissors. I don't know that these are my very favorite. I really haven't tried other large fabric scissors, but these scissors, the Ginger scissors, have been around for a long time, and these were ones that my mother had. She took good care of them, and I take good care of them, and these will last a lifetime. They are more expensive, but these are a good investment. Just an interesting fact about the scissors, the Ginger scissors debuted in 1947, and they were the premier cutting tool in the textile industry at that time. They're made out of a carbon cutlery steel, so they're a little bit heavier, but they are a nice fabric scissor. So those are the two scissors that I really do like. Now, I do, of course, use a seam ripper. Unfortunately, I have to use a seam ripper, but this is just a little seam ripper, and there's nothing really special about this. I don't have to have a special seam ripper. I can really use about any kind. I wouldn't have to say this is my favorite. This is just the one that I use, so nothing extremely special about that one. It's just, again, the one that I typically use. Now, I want to show you my favorite little cutting tool. I don't know if you can see that very well. It's just a little triangle. It has some little non-slip feet on the bottom, and it has a little tiny blade in there. And I love to use this when I chain piece. I don't know what it is, but there's just something that's really satisfying when I cut with this little cutter. So here I just have a small sample of chain stitch squares, and I'm just going to show you how this works. All you do is you just take it and you just press it down over there, and it just cuts so nicely, and it's so quick, and it's so fun and so satisfying. So there is my little favorite tool. I got this one from the Fat Quarter shop, and I just recently ordered another one because I use them so much. So those are my cutting tools. Now the next tools, I'm going to move these out of the way, and the next tools I want to talk about are my pressing tools. So let me switch gears here. Okay, now to me it's extremely important to have a good iron. I like to press my blocks. I press my seams as I go along, so having a good iron is important to me. Now, what I consider a good iron is, number one, an iron that gets really, really hot, and an iron that uses or has really good steam, a really good steam feature. Now, some quilters don't use steam, but I do use steam. So this is a Shark Professional Series machine that I just, not machine, but iron that I purchased at my local Walmart. It cost me between $40 and $50. I have used, for a long time, I used the expensive Rowenta irons, but my irons somehow kept getting knocked off, especially when my kids were younger, and every time those Rowentas got knocked off and hit the floor, they leaked. So those are a big investment. Those are way more expensive than this one, and this is just a great iron. And again, it was pretty inexpensive, so if I have to replace it, it's not that big of a deal as when I purchased the expensive Rowenta irons. Now, I've had this iron for several years, so just to let you know, I've been fortunate enough that this one hasn't gotten knocked off. Okay, my next favorite tool for pressing are these stylus spray bottles. These have a beautiful misting feature, and it just makes a nice mist that covers your fabric nicely and evenly. You don't get one burst of water and a big water spot on your fabric. So I love these. One has distilled water, and then one has Best Press in it. Now, I purchased one at Missouri Star, and I believe this one I purchased at one of our local quilt shops, or one of the local quilt shops that I visited. I also use Best Press, which is a sizing and starch alternative. I really like Best Press. I like the little bit of stiffness it gives my fabric after I've pressed it. And again, I think it helps my seams remain flat. So those are the ironing tools or pressing tools that I use. The next thing I want to talk about are my pins. When I learned to quilt, I learned to pin. And I do take the time to pin. Lots of quilters don't, and that's okay. You just have to do what works for you. But I use the IBC glass head silk pins. These are 1 3/8 inch long, and they're 0.5 millimeters. I love these pins. These are so thin and so fine. They just glide through your fabric. They don't leave a hole in your fabric, and they're just super easy to pin with. Now, I do want to let you know, if you pin heavier fabrics like denim, I just recently discovered that they bend these pretty bad, so I wouldn't recommend using these on denim. And I am looking into other pins that I want to try to use when I sew with denim. Okay, my magnetic pin holders. This was just a cheaper version. I think I probably got this at our local Walmart or local quilt store. And then I ordered this from the Fat Quarter Shop. I just love the color, and I like that it's a little bit deeper than this one. But those are the magnetic, and I prefer those because the pins stay in place and don't end up all over my floor and all over my surface. Now, this is just a little hack I wanted to share with you. This is an old gum container, and I use this to store my discarded sharps, my pens, my broken sewing machine needles, or just the ones I've replaced, and also my rotary cutting blades. Because even though my rotary cutting blades have become dull and aren't cutting fabric very well, that doesn't mean they won't cut flesh well. And when I dispose of these in the trash can, I want anybody who handles my trash, like my family members when they take it out to the trash, and then city workers who dispose of my trash, I do not want them to get cut. So I fill this up, and once it's full, then I discard the whole thing in the trash can. But these are, I love these. This is just a cool way to store your used sharps safely. Another thing that I really like are binding clips. I use those, of course, when I'm doing binding. Sometimes I use them when I'm sewing to hold the fabric in place. But here I just have 3 different sizes and varieties. This is a larger binding clip. This is the same style, but a smaller one. And then this has a tiny little head on it. And I really like those. So those are just my binding clips, and I take those wherever I go to. So those are my pinning tools. I wanted to mention the 3 marking tools that I use. Now, I just used the Paper Mate mechanical pencil. This is 0.7 millimeter lead in it, and I have really liked using these. I always mark my half square triangles. Lots of people don't take the time to do that. That works for me, so I do that. But this was the first tool that I used, and I still use this at times, especially if I don't have one of the others. But this is a Fons & Porter's marking pencil, and this has the white lead in it that marks dark fabrics. And this is a new Sew Line mechanical pencil that has just the regular lead, pencil lead color in it, and I use that one. I really, really like all 3 of these marking tools. Okay, I have a couple of miscellaneous items that are super important when I sew, and those are Post-it notes. I love to make quilt kits. Over the years, I've made lots of quilt kits for the Quilts of Valor project and baby quilts that our local quilt guild has done. And then I like to pre-cut all my fabric when I'm getting ready to make a quilt, and I use these a lot. I also use these when I'm sewing on a project, so that when I'm finished, I mark these and put that in the container so that I know where I've left off. So the next time I pick up that project, I'm not spending hours trying to figure out where I was and what I was doing. So Post-it notes, I do prefer the Post-it note brands. These just seem to have really good adhesive and stick to whatever surface I put them on. The next thing is also an adhesive project, but this is a sticky roller. There's lots of different brands of these. The brand, I really don't have a preference on the brand, but I use these when I'm sewing to clean off my shirt and my pants because I always seem to be covered in threads. My design wall is behind this quilt, and I use it to clean my design wall. I also have two adorable Boston Terriers, and sometimes their dog hair gets on me, and I use this to get the dog hair off. The last thing I wanted to talk about are some storage containers that I use. I do try to keep my sewing area organized. I don't work well when it's disorganized. For some reason it disorganizes my thoughts and it's hard for me to concentrate if there's a great big mess while I'm sewing. Now I do want to say that that doesn't mean that my quilt room's never a mess. My quilt room is frequently a mess, but when I get ready to sew, I need to have a clean area, and these storage containers help me to have a good clean area. The first one are just these clear zippered bags. I love these. These say Ellen on them, but you don't have to have this brand. There's lots of different brands. There's makeup bags in this style that you can use. But the reason I like these is because it's a thicker vinyl, so they hold together well and they hold up good, and you can see through them. So I have these in lots of different sizes. They're easy to throw in a bag and take when I leave the house and go somewhere else to sew. The next storage containers that I absolutely love are the Art Bin storage containers. The reason I like these, or the reasons that I like these, are that they're clear and that they have these great snaps that hold. Now, if you have problems with these opening up, it's because you didn't snap them good, because these have a fantastic snap and these stay shut once you have snapped them shut. So again, these come in a variety of sizes. I have this on my sewing table, and it just helps, again, keep my area organized and my tools easily accessible. Now this is another Art Bin, and I have lots of these. I store my UFOs in these, and yes, I do have lots of UFOs. Even though I make easy quilts, all of these quilts that I make could be completed in a reasonable time period. However, I'm like every other quilter. Sometimes I want to try something new, and so I get UFOs piled up. So I do have some UFOs. But the reason I like this one is because it provides a nice storage area and it has a handle. And again, it has these good snaps that stay shut once you hear that click and you know you've got that locked. Okay, that's it for the quilting tools I wanted to show you today. I want to thank everybody that watched my first video. I want to thank those of you who joined me today. This is an exciting process for me, and I am really enjoying it so far. I continue to learn a lot. Please leave a comment if you have a question or just a suggestion, or just any comment in general. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, and if you'd like to subscribe, hit the subscribe button. Now, I did want to tell you before I go just a little bit about my upcoming video. My next video is going to be a quilt room tour. I love to see quilt room tours that other quilters provide. I like to go to other people's quilt rooms, to their homes, and see their quilt rooms. I've had a chance to see several because it gives me ideas on how to do things better in my quilt room. So that will be coming up on my next video. Again, thank you for joining me. And